Sean Connery was picked as the actor most likely to succeed in convincing the audience that he was James Bond.
To remember that Sean was a pretty rough diamond at that time, and Terence taught him everything he knew.
I thought it was not a good script at all, but then I was very happy about it because I thought, if I accept that script, at least it's not going to be my fault that the film is bad.
If you asked what were the three ingredients for Dr. No for James Bond, it was Sean Connery, Sean Connery, Sean Connery.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This is my first video. My name is Gosse, I'm an editor for James Bond Netherlands, and I've been a James Bond fan ever since I was 5 years old. In the past I used to make YouTube videos and I thought it was nice to combine these two quirks. Today I'll start my review of the very first Bond film Dr. No, released in 1962, or 1963 if you're from the Netherlands like myself. Before I begin, please like this video and don't forget I'm just talking about my own opinion. It's not up to me what you enjoy in the Bond film, so your opinions are always welcome in the comment section below. Ever since the release of the Casino Royale novel in 1953, Ian Fleming tried to get James Bond to the big screen. That even happened the next year with an episode of the same name for the American TV series Climax. But in the years that followed, the author was less successful selling his other stories. A few years later, Fleming wrote a film script named Longitude 78 West, together with Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham. The film was cancelled, but elements got used for the novel we now know as Thunderball. Fleming however didn't ask permission to use their collective ideas for this new book, so he got sued and lost the film rights to Thunderball in court. So, despite offering his stories to multiple companies and people in the industry, he didn't have any success. However, everything changed when the Canadian filmmaker Harry Saltzman bought the rights for $50,000. This deal included every Bond novel except Casino Royale, those rights were still with somebody else because of an earlier deal, and Thunderball, due to the reasons I just explained. But not only Saltzman wanted to make James Bond films, so did American Albert R. Broccoli, also known as Cubby. And yes, his forefathers really were broccoli farmers. They met and quickly formed a partnership. They chose to name the new company Eon Productions. For the pace of this video, I'm not going to delve too deep into this rabbit hole. There's a theory that Eon might stand for everything or nothing. For now I just want to say that there are conflicting interviews about it, and even Barbara Broccoli doesn't fully seem to remember what's correct, so I'll just let it slip. Maybe you've also seen the name Denjak in relation to the Bond films. That's because Cubby and Harry also started a holding company, which is responsible for the copyright, trademarks and other things related to the series. Denjak is named to their wives, Dana Broccoli and Jacqueline Saltzman. There are a few reasons Broccoli and Saltzman decided that Dr. No would be their very first James Bond film. Ian Fleming's first novel couldn't be filmed because, well... Then they turned to Thunderball, but... So because of these reasons, Eon turned to Dr. No, the sixth James Bond novel. Another reason was that it mainly took place in Jamaica, which saved them a lot of money. Because Eon couldn't finance this film on their own, they had to form a partnership with United Artists. But they didn't want to risk too much money on this film, because well, Bond and the producers hadn't yet made a name for themselves. So to reduce risk, United Artists only gave Eon $1 million, which even at the time was the whole lot of money for a big action film. Ultimately, the producers did need to ask for an additional $10,000 to complete the climax, which they received. To find their James Bond 007, the producers held a contest, but there wasn't a suitable candidate. Cubby asked his wife Dana what he should do, and she told him to go with Sean Connery. Fleming however didn't think Connery was fit, and would much rather have somebody else got the role. The producers stick with Connery, but he did need a bit of polish. To shape the rough diamond, Eon chose director Terence Young, who took Connery to his personal tailor and hairdresser. Young also introduced him to the high life of London with its many casinos, restaurants and women. Together with producers, Young thought of everything that Bond should be.
There was a very high level meeting. We discussed at great length the character of Bond, the type of things he would have, whether he would have cufflinks, a tie pin, an identity chain, what watch he was wearing, what sort of wallet.
Now the producers had one last hurdle to overcome, the casting of Honey Rider.
Well, my ex-husband took a photograph of me, which he took with him going to Europe, and Harry Saltzman saw that photograph, and when they were working on the script, he said, that's the girl we want.
So now there was a script, a leading man and a leading lady. Let the dots roll in. For the first time ever, the public saw the now well-known gun barrel sequence, this time including the credit with the name of the producers. This gun barrel was a weird one with all straight beeping noises, but I don't mind it that much because we hear the classic James Bond theme immediately after Bob Simmons fires the gun. Well, almost immediately. From the gun barrel we go straight into the title sequence. Something we see only happen again with Daniel Craig's first James Bond film, Casino Royale. I guess if the film had a pre-title sequence, it would probably have been the death of Strangways and his secretary. But instead we're looking at flashy dollar dots. I used to not really like this title sequence because it's so different and doesn't really fit the rest of the series. But the dots were reintroduced with No Time to Die and during the 60th anniversary of the series. And it made me revalue these titles a lot actually. I'm also guessing it's the only title sequence in which we see men dancing in addition to women. This section of the sequence always feels quite weird. The transition is strange and it just doesn't feel quite smooth. But hey, who would have thought back then that a Dutch 23-year-old would be overanalyzing this sequence 60 years later? The shift to the three blind mice however is very suitable. The visuals look good and the transition to the three men crossing the street is a nice moment. The film also ensures the audience knows they're in an exotic location. Seeing the mainstream life of Jamaica at the time is something I always appreciate. It's an aspect you hardly see in any Bond film these days and something I dearly miss. It's almost as if a camera was just set up to film some regular street life. We're introduced to Professor Strangways, who plays cards with his friends. Strangways doesn't make it to the end of the film however, because the three blind mice are not blind at all. I've always thought it was funny that they went through the trouble of raising a hearse for getting rid of Strangways. Wasn't it just as easy to throw the body in the trunk of any random car? Strangway's secretary suffers the same unfortunate fate as her boss. I know a lot of people are annoyed by the jump cuts, but at home at the small screen it doesn't bother me that much. I'm always way more amazed by the bright red color of her blood. Together with some awful music, the three blind mice take the Dr. No file with them. In London, someone's now talking to the dead phone line without moving his lips.
Hello W6M, report my signals.
Luckily, his boss is there to help him, and he has the special ability to have his voice changed within a 5-meter walk.
Right, give me the MI6 radio security control.
What is it?
But let's not nitpick too much on the 6-year-old film. And I have to hand it to them. They were really ahead of their time with adapting plastic screens for COVID. This is definitely a spit-proof environment. The problem however is serious, so MI6 has to be called in. I don't need to tell you which iconic movie moment comes next. Rarely did an extra take his job so seriously. Just see how convincing his facial expressions are. Obviously I'm just talking about the introduction of Sean Connery as James Bond. A scene so iconic because, well, it's filmed just perfectly. At first, we only see him from behind. See how he plays his cards, and then there's the famous introduction and the smooth talk with Sylvia Trench moments later.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Everything you need to know about James Bond comes together right here at this very moment. James Bond is the coolest man alive and this scene shows it. Bond however has to report to the office and it's one of the only times we actually see him walking through the hallway at MI6. Do these signs mean there are offices in this building? Or does every MI6 branch has its own cover name? Immediately there's one of the stronger Bond Moneypenny scenes in the series. It's a well-known story that Maxwell once told she and Connery came up with the idea of a little shared history between their characters.
When Moneypenny was a young secretary in the typing pool and Bond was a tea boy as he was taking lessons in pistol shooting and one thing and another, they felt rather attracted to each other and they went away for a sort of very long weekend. And they appreciated each other very much and there was a great deal of affection. And Moneypenny knew that if she fell in love with Bond, really fell in love with him, that her heart would be broken forever. And he realized that if he fell in love with her, he'd have to marry her. So after that long weekend, they just never got together again.
Brilliantly absolutely claims his role as M. It's clear from Bond's face that he's in awe of this man. There's even this little moment when M wants to lit his pipe and Bond gets up to offer M his own lighter. By the way, has anyone ever noticed that M has 5 different pipes? 5? What on earth do you need 5 pipes for? Does he hotbox in the office with his friends after he finished work for the day? Their conversation follows, and in this weird moment, M says MI7 instead of MI6.
Since I've been head of MI7, there's been a 40%.
You can clearly see how his mouth and words don't match up. Apparently they replaced her name MI6 with MI7 so not to get in trouble with their real secret intelligence, but it's strange nonetheless. So there's this oddity that Bond walks out of M's office with this wooden box, and, well, he gives it to Moneypenny, which looks quite cute, but have you ever thought about what he actually gives to her? Major Boothwood carries his box with him when he enters the room. Inside the box is Bond's new Walther, which Bond puts in his shoulder holster immediately. So now the box is empty, except for a magazine, which Boothwood put in the box after he gave Bond the gun. Bond walks out with Beretta, but has to return it to M. So now there's just this empty box with the gun magazine. Why is Bond giving his box to Moneypenny? It's not like there's anything inside the box that would interest her. Even her face during the scene transition tells us she's disappointed. Now I think about it. It's strange they replaced the gun at all. This is their first Bond film. It's not like we've seen him struggle with his previous gun. So this is just valuable screen time without the plot moving forward. You can cut this part entirely and nothing would change story-wise. James gets home, and I always love moments like these, in which we see Bond's house or personal belongings. As someone who gets inspired by the Bond lifestyle and who collects Bond's personal items, these moments are great. It also tells us much about his character. It's a very different house than Fleming describes in the books, but this is not the right time to make a full analysis of this film set. 007 proves for the first time that he isn't really the guy to care about strict schedules, and makes out for a little while before he flies off to Jamaica. There, it's immediately shown that he's being followed by a blonde gentleman and a woman with a camera. He notices her, however, and when the next suspicious guy incorrectly tells Bond he was sent as a taxi driver, Bond deliberately goes for the bed. It tells us a lot about Bond's character. He's not afraid to face the danger, and also not to face the unknown. Bond decides to play along, and miraculously does not lose his head at this speed while sitting in a convertible. The first chase in the series feels a bit clunky at times, but it teaches us about the world Bond finds himself in. Everyone is watching everyone. The car makes a right turn and ensures that Bond and Jones lose their persuaders. Watching the part that follows, it's not strange that 60 years later we're still looking at the James Bond franchise and not the Jones franchise. I mean, the poor guy's already sweating after a short chase, while Bond already planned his next move. A nice detail after the fight are James's red knuckles. Bond receives some information at Government House and heads to Strangway's place. In the background we see the three blind mice walking around, so it's clear that Bond is still being followed. After finding a letter containing some clues, a hotel scene follows, in which James gets his first legendary martini. Mixed and not stirred, apparently.
One medium dry vodka martini. Mixed like you said, sir, and not stirred.
Before 007 leaves, he ensures nobody can snoop around without him being aware. Knowing that Connery would be bald nearly 10 years later, I would have asked someone else to donate their hair if I were him. Bond ends up meeting Quarrel through Strangway's friends. Quarrel, however, doesn't trust Bond, but before Bond can question him, a fight breaks out, and the unknown gentleman from the airport is here again. It turns out to be Felix Leiter. I'll say it right now, Jack Lord is my favorite Felix Leiter, right behind Jeffrey Wright. I can really see him and Bond becoming good friends. Later that evening, the lady with the camera can also be found at the bar. Bond thinks she's suspicious, and she clearly doesn't have a good story. In all her panic, she smashes her camera lamp on the table and rips open Quarrel's face. Strangely enough, no one at the table, not even Quarrel, seems to care. Shouldn't ask anyone Quarrel if he's okay or anything. I mean, I know he barely reacted himself, but he just got his face smashed with a lamp. Quarrel tells how he and Strangways once went to Crab Key for samples, which matches the letter Bond found at the beginning of the film. The next day, Bond reaches out to Professor Dent for some simple questions, but the answers don't satisfy him. Moments after Bond left, we see the Professor racing to Crab Key. It's here that we enter one of the best Ken Adam sets of the series. And while the shape of the ceiling window is illogical looking at the construction of the building's exterior, the old room certainly helps with the creepy vibe that's surrounding Dr. No. His voice is so calm and authoritarian at the same time. It's no wonder Professor Dent's afraid of him.
Our attempts failed.
Your attempts failed. I do not like failure. You are not going to fail me again, Professor.
We go back to Bond when he enters his hotel, when this woman clearly stares at his perfectly formed house. They just never look at me in that way. Turns out someone did snoop around the hotel room. Connery must be really glad that he didn't give up the precious hair for nothing. Bond's sleeping when suddenly he feels something moving. I know that the spider isn't poisonous, but honestly, if I saw such a beast crawling over me, I would totally freak out. So I can understand Bond's reaction. The weird thing is, however, how freaked out the people behind the camera were. There was a medical team on set and Bob Simmons even called it scariest stunt ever. The spider finishes his last few steps on screen on the top of a glass plate, and that's all we ever see of this little guy. Finally, James manages to escape from the spider when he decides to kill it with Looney Tunes sounds. I can almost only imagine how big the stain is in the carpet right now and how Bond has to explain when he checks out, like, well, there was this big giant spider. Maybe James even has to puke from this experience, like he once does in the Casino Royale novel? We don't know for certain, but we do see that the incident had a real impact on him.
Morning, Playdale Smith.
Playdale Smith thinks it's odd that both documents about Dr. No have disappeared, but Bond says he'd only be weirded out if they weren't. As he leaves the room, he notices that Miss Taro is eavesdropping on the conversation, which supports his theory of a mole. The samples Strangways brought with him from Crab Key turned out to be radioactive. So now there's even more reason for 007 to check out the island. But not before he visits Miss Taro.
Then along the Windward Road, until you get to the cement factory. Then you turn left.
I've always liked the editing in this scene, with the voiceover of Miss Taro and Bond relaxed driving the car. And, well, we don't often have voiceovers in this series. The poor rear projection is an eyesore, and the car behind Bond seems absolutely gigantic compared to the small sunbeam. The sounds aren't very good either. When Bond's supposed to be tapped on his bumper, it just sounds very cheap. However, I do like the story behind this little car. In the Live and Let Die novel, Bond visits Jamaica and borrows the Sunbeam from Strangways, which is his personal car. 4 years later in Dr. No, Bond returns to Jamaica and then he's given Strangway's car while conducting his investigations. Since Dr. No is one of the more faithful book-to-screen adaptations, it's logical that the producers wanted Bond to have the same car as he did in the novel. The Bond series hadn't had any prestige yet, and Sunbeam denied the filmmakers' request for a car. So they searched around the island looking for locals, and well, they finally found this light blue Sunbeam, which they rented for 12 shillings a day. Bond manages to shake off the car with the 3 blind mice by driving it underneath a digger. The big hearse, however, has to dodge it and explodes for no good reason.
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
I never understood this joke. I get that the 3 blind mice ride a hearse, but what's the joke itself? Maybe I just don't think it's very witty and I'm missing something? Please let me know in the comments. A surprised Miss Terror opens the door and wears, well, something that exists. So then Bond forces himself onto her.
Forgive me.
Something she doesn't seem to enjoy, but he does it anyway. She tries to inform headquarters, but she isn't very subtle when Bond comes in.
A couple of hours. All right. I'll have to go now. All right, I'll call you later.
I've always loved how 007 looks at his watch while he waits for the so-called taxi. Together they leave, and does she always leave the light on?
The lights.
No, I always leave them on.
Miss Terror definitely wouldn't survive a utility bill if she lived in 2022. Anyway, she's discharged and never to be heard from again. Meanwhile, Bond is messing around to make it appear like he and Miss Terror had a genuine romantic evening. And as any normal romantic evening, you apparently drink shots of vodka together. With the girl gone, Bond is now waiting who will come for him. In the close-up of Bond's weapon, it becomes clear that he isn't using a Walther PPK. This whole film doesn't feature a Walther PPK to be exact. On receiving his weapon and during his first meeting with Leiter, he uses a Walther PP, not a PPK. Now, in this scene, he doesn't even use a Walther, but a Browning. The same can be said about Professor Dent, who does not use a Smith & Wesson, but a Colt. None of this really matters when you consider how cool this scene is. It's another one of these character-defining moments. He knows exactly what kind of weapon Dent is using and that the Professor doesn't stand a chance after shooting in 6 bullets. Bond clearly explains to the Professor why he lost his battle, and the moment Dent thinks he can strike unexpectedly, Bond shoots him.
It's a Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
Truly one of the best moments in the series. Bond and Crowell rode to Crab Key, where the next day they were awakened by the singing of an unknown lady. I don't think I need to explain how famous the image of Ursula Andress emerging from the water is. The Bond films themselves have repeated this moment twice. And it reappears with every Bond special. It was truly an iconic moment. But this whole scene is one of my favorites.
Underneath the mango tree, my honey and me.
Bond singing in response is something we never see again. And this "No, I'm just looking" is textbook example of great Bond humor.
What are you doing here? Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
In response, Honey immediately shows that she doesn't like strange men and she isn't afraid to use her knife. Honey is the kind of girl that suddenly has to join the spy world, even though she didn't ask for it. Same goes for Station in View to a Kill and Natalia and Goldeneye. Then there's this other moment when Quarles sees Honey for the first time and he just looks down if Jesus himself just had descended to Earth. Ursula Andress is dubbed by Nicky van der Zeel, who we'll hear a lot more from later in the series. I do like Nicky's soft voice and it does fit Honey. Dr. No's henchmen, however, know there are some unwelcome guests on the island.
We'll be back! We'll be back with the dogs! Full speed ahead!
Sorry, play that again. Does that guy permanently sound like a megaphone?
Full speed ahead!
They escape by crossing the jungle and using bamboo to breathe in the water. And now it gets really dangerous, folks. Do you want to know why? Because there's a sign on this island that tells it's dangerous, and well, signs always tell the truth. Honey tells a very personal story about her father to Bond, and it's actually quite sad. The idea that her father left one night and never returned is heartbreaking. Especially because she herself knows that he was such a good swimmer. And then the man she used to live with raped her.
Then one night he came up to my room. Well, you know. I scratched his face, and then... But he was stronger than I was.
More walks through the woods follow, and they finally come across the dragon Honey and Quarl talked about earlier in the film. But the fact that they continue to believe in this dragon after they saw his construction is a shame. I understand that they are superstitious, but they're not stupid. Surely they'd be able to add 2 and 2 together when they see he's running on wheels. This scene is also the end of poor Quarl, and he's the first in line of many Bond allies to die. The remaining pair is taken captive and checked on radiation. We learn radiation wasn't such a hassle to work with back in the 60s, and apparently you could just wash it off back then. I also find it very funny how Bond takes on a kind of coaching role, and the moment someone tells him he's not in charge, he calmly goes on with what he's doing and he clearly doesn't care.
Do the girl first.
Now look, man, we give the orders around here.
Yeah, that's fine, but do something about this, will you? Here, come here, you. Here.
Both are taking showers, and I have to disappoint you. Andres was wearing a skin-colored suit, so going through this frame by frame, nah, doesn't work. Now they are trapped in the most luxurious cell ever and are giving sedative coffee. Shortly after, we get our first glimpses of Dr. No and his metal hands. But who dragged Bond into the bed? I surely hope it weren't those two poor sisters, since I'm sure they couldn't lift an 85-kilo Scotsman. Honey also wakes with a completely new haircut. Is it moral that she managed to arrange that while she was sleeping? Anyway, they get downstairs, and the first thing Dr. No does is screaming the budget of his own film.
$1 million, Mr. Bond. You were wondering what it cost.
This set has always been one of my favorites, and it's a shame we spent so little time in this environment. So before they eat, we quickly see a painting of the Duke of Wellington. As many of you probably know, the painting was stolen around that time. So as a joke, they put it on this easel. The detail I'm more interested in is the fact that Dr. No spent $1 million to build this place and all he serves are 4 grapes. Kudos to the layout and everything, since well, the grapes are different colors, but 4 grapes? Really? Dr. No shows that he knows everything that happens around the island, which does make him a menacing villain.
They are still puzzled, Mr. Bond.
Not any longer. I sent a complete report.
Look, Mr. Bond, you've not contacted your headquarters since you requested a Geiger count.
He knows it when Bond lies, and in this whole film you can just feel his presence. Quite a remarkable achievement by the filmmakers. Meanwhile, James asks Dr. No to let Honey go, and No agrees. Bond should be more careful what he wishes for, because her leaving doesn't go as planned. It's not like No will just let her go through the front door. To tackle this problem, James uses the argument that
There's no point in involving the girl at this stage. She has nothing to do with us. Let her go free. She'll promise not to talk.
this is one of the most terrifying villains on Earth, and you really think that she won't talk will work? That's the best you could come up with? This is also the first moment in this series that the name Spectre is mentioned.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The 4 great cornerstones of power, headed by the greatest brains in the world.
Although this film pays little attention to the organization, it fits well within the structure of the 60s films. What I mean by that is that this is how proper world building works, looking at Jules Craig films. Together with Bond we learn how big this threat is and how it grows over the years. It feels natural. Bond's jailed, and this is also where the film really starts to differ from the book. The shelf with tests and investigations from the novel have been replaced by some sort of air vent with an, well, obvious stunt double. And apart from the water and the heated pipes, from this point onward the book and the film don't have much in common. Finally, Bond manages to escape and penetrate the main control room. Somehow Dr. No doesn't notice the fact that his employee has changed to a wild Sean Connery, but Bond sees his chance to disrupt the operation. Bond turns a wheel, which causes the whole thing to overheat, and when Dr. No notices 007, he screams something that I don't understand, but apparently it means run for your life, because absolutely no one is going for Bond except him. I also love how he runs with outstretched arms, like it reminds me of Mose from The Office.
Oh my gosh.
The fight between Bond and Dr. No is a bit underwhelming, but the fact that No dies because of his metal hands is a neat detail. I just don't know if I'd rather see him die like this or have him covered in bird droppings like in the novel. I swear I'll pay gold if Purvis and Wade ever let that happen in one of the future Bond films. Unlike No, James manages to escape, but he doesn't know where Honey is.
Where is she?
Number 12.
Apparently she's busy drowning very, very slowly. The story is that the production team ordered crabs to crawl around Honey Rider. But the crabs were dead when they arrived, so they didn't move, which wasn't very menacing at all. Because there wasn't any money to build a new set, they had to go with this very slow drowning scenario. Once outside, everyone's panicking, but luckily for them there's exactly 1 boat left to escape with, while the rest of the employees run around screaming and panicking. Just before the big explosion, the pair leaves and are rescued by Felix shortly afterwards. Remarkably enough, Felix already knows from a distance that it's Bond who's making out with Honey. Felix offers to help Bond and Honey because they ran out of fuel. But that's when Honey decides to wait for Bond on the floor of the boat, of course, which was exactly what we're all thinking, right? James, however, no longer thinks it's necessary to get home, and Honey seems to agree, because when he releases the rescue line, she doesn't really care. The film closes with some terrible sounds that could wake up the neighbors 3 houses down the street, and that's the end of Dr. No. I only have one question. Whatever happened to her shells? Dr. No is a great starting point for the series. It set lots of standards, but because there weren't any previous ones, it also has some fun oddities. The voiceover of Miss Taro and Bond singing are things we've never seen again since this film. The same goes for Honey, who calls out that Bond has sweaty hands right before the dinner with Dr. No.
I'm glad your hands are sweating too.
Of course I'm scared too.
This is one of the only times in any Bond movie that he openly admits that he's scared. This makes Bond feel way more human, and that's a good thing if you ask me. From the beginning to the end, this film has moments that will be built upon by its predecessors. The style, the elegance, the humor, this film is great and top-notch James Bond. Some of these scenes are arguably the best in the series. Think of the casino scene or the interaction with Moneypenny. The colors of this film really pop as well. It's no Thunderball or No Time to Die, but it's still a beautiful picture. Terrence Young clearly knew what he was doing, and he's probably the reason we know Bond as we do today. The style he brought into the series is remarkable, and he's the reason Connery is as good as he is. However, it isn't all perfect. The score is mostly horrendous, except from the James Bond theme and the in-universe songs like Jump Up Jamaica and Underneath the Mango Tree. Some of the lighting and camera angles look quite cheap, and it's a shame that they didn't use actual Asian people to represent Asian characters. Okay, I'm getting really nitpicky here, but if they could align Bob Simmons at the gun barrel at the end, couldn't they just align him with the gun barrel in the beginning? But these criticisms do not make it a bad Bond film, certainly not. The good does really outweigh the bad, and we have to keep in mind it's a 60-year-old film, which even at the time had a small budget.
$1 million, Mr. Bond.
For me, the film only gets better when you realize a lot of it was filmed in the backyard of GoldenEye estate. I can't imagine how great it must have been for Fleming to see his characters come alive so close to home. I'm glad he could at least enjoy that, because well, he couldn't see much of the Bond series. And during writing there was also this very weird idea that Dr. No would be some sort of god monkey who was worshipped on the island. I'm very glad that was taken out. All in all, Dr. No is a very solid Bond film. The producers had one shot and they nailed it. The film was a box office success, although there were a lot of criticism in that time. Fleming didn't even like it after his first watch. And only after money started rolling in and positive reactions for the audience spread the word, he was satisfied as well. It's possibly one of the reasons he made Bond from Scottish heritage and You Only Live Twice. It's certainly the reason he writes about Ursula Andress visiting Pete's Gloria and Majesties. The total growth of Dr. No ended up just being short of $60 million, and President Kennedy even requested a private showing at the White House. Not strange that after this positive reception by the audience, the producers wanted more. And more we'll get in the next James Bond film from Russia with Love. Thank you so much everyone, I had great fun writing my thoughts down and I hope you enjoyed it watching as well. If you enjoyed watching, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, it helped me out a lot. Thank you. See you next time. I don't really mind it because we heard the gun barrel right after Bob Simmons. I'm starting to like Sean Connery here.